The tragedy of samsara is what we live 24/7. Those of us with ordinary minds, I'll speak for myself. The months since January of 2020 have been filled with heartbreaking news, extreme suffering, both physical and mental, for people around the planet, as COVID-19 has made its steady and unrelenting march around the globe. The first of the endless stories that have troubled me deeply and brought feelings of sorrow was when we learned about Dr. Lee, who came to the world's attention after blowing the whistle on the new SARS-like virus, which had been discovered among patients in Wuhan in December of 2019. Chinese police initially reprimanded him for spreading rumors. The 34-year-old doctor later died after catching coronavirus from a patient. But the heartbreak of learning about the suffering of others in the past 16 months includes much more than the global pandemic. I dare not mention all the other topics that continue to break my heart for fear of missing one that might be the most important one for you. I have been deeply affected by the stories I've heard from Venerable Children, as we heard from her through Winter Retreat, and the ones I had time to read about. And it was during the Winter Retreat that I was inspired to read Good Karma by Venerable Children to add to my understanding of karma, in addition to the teachings that we were receiving at that time from Volume 2, Foundation of Buddhist Practice by His Holiness Dalai Lama and Venerable Children. So I was reading very slowly. I had the time to do that. I was meditating on each verse for multiple sessions. And then the verse that I kept coming back to, because it was such effective medicine for the sorrow and the heartbreak that I was feeling in relation to the stories breaking in this country and around the world, was verse 10. So this is the book you want to get if you don't have it yet, Good Karma. I'm going to read verse 10 for you and the commentary that follows, and then I'll explain how it was so effective for my feelings of sorrow and lamentation. So verse 10 is, when my mind falls prey to suffering, it is the weapon of destructive karma turning upon me for definitely causing turbulence in the hearts of others. From now on, I will take all suffering upon myself. So the commentary that Venerable gives in relation to this verse goes like this. Many people in developed countries have much greater mental suffering than physical suffering. They're plagued by depression, anxiety, fear, worry, feelings that arise when we fail to achieve our aims or believe we are being rejected, abandoned, or treated unfairly. Many people in undeveloped nations are usually too busy trying to meet their basic survival needs to have this kind of mental suffering. When we experience mental anguish, we can use this as an opportunity to learn how our mind works. And so this is what I did. I used every time I felt sorrow and sadness, I would go to this verse, and I would then do the instruction here. Rather than focus on the story behind your feeling, just pay attention to the mental feeling of unhappiness. Be aware of how it differs from physical suffering. That's very important advice to do. Leave the story aside, focus on the mental feeling of unhappiness. Then be aware of your reactions to mental suffering. We dislike it, we get angry, we blame others, we crave to experience pleasant mental feelings. We do everything we can to get rid of the unpleasant mental feelings. We may drink or take drugs, speak harshly to others, gamble, sleep around, overeat, overspend, and do many other actions that only create more suffering for us now and in the future. So obviously, in my case, I was doing hardly any of those. Most of them I wasn't doing. But in my case, my mind has this habit of going from sadness to personal distress and then despair. That's my pattern. I know it. So instead of repeatedly playing out our responses to unpleasant mental feelings, we can adopt the perspective of this verse and view our mental suffering as the result of our own harmful actions, specifically causing turbulence in the hearts of others. For example, in the past, we may have inflicted mental pain on others by criticizing them, ridiculing them, humiliating them, or shaming them. Being rebellious, inconsiderate, or uncooperative, we've done things that have brought them worry, grief, or embarrassment. An effective way to transform mental anguish into the path to awakening is to take all mental suffering upon ourselves and give others our mental joy. We do this through the taking and giving meditation. So for those of you who might be very new to this, or maybe you've never heard this special meditation technique before, there's a beautiful explanation of this, if you're new, in this book, and even if you're not new. It's very accessible in An Open-Hearted Life by Venerable Children and Dr. Russell Coates, and it's chapter 30 that you want to turn to. So while doing this meditation, especially when you're new to this, one part of the mind protests and says, I don't want to take on anyone else's mental pain. I can't even handle my own. That's a normal, I think, response we have initially. I want someone to take away my mental suffering. Or in my case, when I was first learning this technique, I was afraid to do it. I could take certain parts of people's suffering, like their mental sadness or anxiety about having cancer, but I thought if I imagined taking on their cancer, I would get it too. And that is absolutely not possible. It's karmically not possible. It just isn't going to happen. So the state of mind that is resisting doing this is suffering too. And so Venerable encourages us by saying, build up your courage by thinking, I'm experiencing mental pain as a result of my own destructive karma. Since I'm experiencing this mental anguish anyway, may I take on the mental pain of everyone else. Take on the pain of people who are grieving the loss of dear ones, and the people who are fearful because they live in an unstable, war-torn country. Take on the misery of those with mental illness. Take on the pain of those whose trust has been betrayed. Do all of this happily. Use this pain to destroy the selfishness that motivated you to create the karma that brought about your own mental unhappiness. Feel light and relaxed as you use others' mental pain to destroy the preoccupation that keeps you stuck in your own mental pain and self-pity. So the devil's advocates out there may say, well, yeah, that sounds really good. But Samson, in your case, the mental suffering was not in relation to behaving like a jerk in the past. It was due to hearing about the suffering of others. And that's true. But I used this technique and it still helped me. It helped me stay away from personal distress and despair. Spending time imagining what the suffering is like for those who've lost a loved one due to COVID-19, or imagining what it's like for the family and loved ones of someone, an African-American person, an innocent person who was murdered by a police officer, imagining what it's like for the nurses and doctors, especially in an ICU unit, where they're the ones there with the person who's dying, and their family members are in despair because they're looking at their loved one through a screen, an iPad. Imagining that, doing that, it takes the focus off of my own suffering, about my heartbreak, about this situation. And that's what brings the pain. When I can shift my mind to what might be going on for others, it's a huge relief. And it also helps, at least in my case, it helps me cultivate this aspiration of developing eventually, some compassion. So every time I applied this meditation in this last few months to whatever was pulling at my heart, I would say those words that are in this book. Since I'm experiencing this mental anguish anyway, may I take on the pain of everyone else who's experiencing this kind of mental suffering in ways that are so much more intense than my own. That's for sure. Likely beyond what I can currently imagine. So I've discovered again, in a deeper way, that Tonglen is a very potent medicine for self-centeredness that I live with every day. Imagining giving to people what they need as far as comfort and support, imagining that they encounter a spiritual teaching that in time will help them heal from the depths of despair and grief, imagining that in time they'll be able to move forward in their lives and be a support for others, that expands my mind and heart. And these self-centered mental states that I can fall into so easily, they don't help me. They block me from my ability to help others. And it's good for me to look at what this verse also talks about. All those other things that bring me mental suffering. That's really good for me to look at. the mind of blame. In volume 3, in Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature, His Holiness and Venerable Children write, to look more closely at the Buddha's description of two dukkha, we are already aware of the suffering involved in birth, sickness, aging, and death. Sorrow is our response to misfortune and disagreeable situations. When sorrow intensifies so that it becomes unbearable, we cry or weep. This is lamentation. Pain refers to physical pain of whatever sort. Dejection is mental pain, unhappiness, and depression. Due to pain or dejection, suffering becomes overwhelming, and we despair, giving up hope because we see no recourse to solve our difficulties. So when we apply the medicine of the Dharma, we need not veer into dejection, personal distress, and despair. This self-centered thinking robs us of keeping others as the focus of our concern, love, affection, and care. We can use our own physical and mental suffering as lightning rods to transform our mind, build our fortitude, and be ready for the next situation that arises. It's going to happen. Minutes from now, hours from now, later today, guaranteed. We're in samsara. And in time, what I'm looking forward to doing, I don't know if it'll be this life, I don't know. You'll be able to do this with a calm and clear mind. The antidotes are not meant to dull the pain of dukkha, but to still have the feelings that arise of sorrow and lamentation, and use them to grow our compassion for others, and to continually convince ourselves that samsara must and can be overcome. Verse 10, good karma.